The gravel lot behind the Joint Tactical Integration Facility was quiet at 2 in the morning, except for the wind moving across the desert floor and the distant hum of generators keeping the base alive. No moon, just the kind of darkness that pressed down on everything, like a hand over a mouth. She stepped out of the admin trailer alone. No weapon, no clipboard, no name on her chest, just black boots, tan cargo pants, and a plain gray shirt that hung loose enough to hide what was underneath. She moved without ceremony, without hesitation, crossing the gravel, with the kind of economy that came not from confidence, but from something older than that. Something earned in places that didn't have names on any public map. She was compact, maybe 5'5", dark hair pulled back tight enough to pass any inspection, mirrored aviator glasses that covered half her face even at this hour. On her inner wrist, barely visible in the low light, a small tattoo shaped like something between a serpent and a blade. No color, just ink and intention. 3 men stepped out of the shadows near the motor pool fence. They had been waiting. The one in front was broad across the shoulders, mid-30s, with the kind of tan that came from years in hot places doing things that didn't make the official record. His name was Cole Harwick, former infantry, now a contractor collecting checks training tactical response teams for private firms overseas. He had a way of filling space that he mistook for authority. Behind him, 2 trainees, both young, both running on adrenaline and the specific stupidity that came from thinking you were the most dangerous person in any room you walked into. Harwick stepped into her path. She stopped. He looked her up and down the way men do when they have already made up their minds. His voice carried in the still desert air loud enough to make sure the others could hear. "Hey, sweetheart, you lose something out here." She didn't answer. He smiled. The kind of smile that expected a reaction and knew how to use silence against people who weren't used to it. She looked at him, then down at his feet, then at the ground between them, then directly at his throat. It was a small movement, barely a shift of the eyes, but something in it made Harwick take half a step back before he realized what he had done. He covered it fast, cracking his knuckles, reassembling the performance. She looked at all 3 of them once more. Then she said 2 words. "Last chance." Harwick blinked. Then he laughed. The trainees laughed with him, the kind of laughter that needs an audience to survive. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't move. She just stood there in the dark with her hands at her sides and her eyes steady behind those mirrored glasses, looking at all 3 of them the way a person looks at a problem they have already solved. Harwick stopped laughing. He moved forward. 10 seconds later, not one of them was standing. No one saw exactly what happened. Not in real time. Only later, when someone pulled the partial footage from an exterior camera left running by accident, did anyone get a look at it. And even then, frame by frame, it was hard to understand. Not because she was fast, but because she was precise in a way that ordinary violence never is. She had given them their chance. They hadn't taken it. The desert went quiet again. She walked back toward the admin building without looking back. Her boots steady on the gravel, her breathing even as if the air itself had simply rearranged around her and returned to normal. That was the first night. Go back 3 weeks. The Joint Tactical Integration Facility sat at the edge of a dry valley in the California desert, 40 miles from anything that looked like a town. It wasn't Army. It wasn't Marine Corps. It wasn't federal law enforcement, though it had drawn from all 3. It was what the brass liked to call a blended combat readiness installation, a place where branches and agencies sent personnel for joint training rotations that didn't show up cleanly in anyone's budget. The kind of place where chain of command got complicated fast. And in places where chain of command gets complicated, ego fills the vacuum. It always does. She arrived on a Tuesday. No escort. No announcement. A single bag over one shoulder, a set of orders that cleared security in under 60 seconds, and a file that the gate guard didn't look at twice, but that a senior instructor named Aldridge would spend 40 minutes with that same evening reading and rereading a document that raised more questions than it answered. Her name was listed as Rena Holt, contractor, signals intelligence, attached to a cross-branch joint task force, deployment history classified under OGA parameters. OGA, other government agency. The kind of notation that didn't mean civilian support. It meant something else, something that polite people didn't press on. Aldridge set the file down and looked out the window at the training yard below. He had been doing this for 19 years. He had seen operators, soldiers, federal agents, and every variety of contractor that money and necessity could produce. He had developed over those 19 years a reliable instinct for what people were before they showed him. But this one sat differently on him, and he couldn't say why yet. Not with any precision. She was already on the training pad. She had found the equipment staging area without being directed to it, and was kneeling next to a grappling dummy adjusting the chest straps with a quiet focus that made her look like she was doing something meditative. The other personnel in the yard were watching her, not talking to her, just watching the way people watch something they cannot yet classify. Cole Harwick noticed her on her second day. He ran a loose crew of contractors who treated the facility like a proving ground for their own mythology. They were good at their jobs, some of them, but good and humble rarely arrived in the same person. He walked across the training pad toward her with two of his crew behind him, and the particular stride of a man who had never been told no by anyone who scared him. She was standing at the edge of the equipment area reviewing a target schematic on a clipboard, making small marks with a pen that suggested she was doing something far more specific than casual reading. "Hey," he said, "you lost." She looked up, just briefly. The mirrored glasses caught the morning light and threw it back at him. He took that as an invitation. "You're in the wrong building, sweetheart." Admin and support staff check in at the east trailer. One of the men behind him said something under his breath. The other one smirked. She lowered the clipboard. She looked at Harwick with an expression that was not quite neutral and not quite anything else, like a door held carefully shut. "Walk away," she said. Harwick spread his hands. "I'm just trying to help." She turned back to the schematic. The men exchanged glances. Harwick's jaw set in the particular way of someone who was not accustomed to being dismissed and even less accustomed to it happening in front of witnesses. He filed the moment away. He would come back to it. He always came back. He would remember it later after everything and understand that she had given him his chance and he hadn't recognized it for what it was. The pit exercise happened on day 5. The training arena was a sand-swept rectangle of rubber matting inside a low metal structure that smelled of sweat and chalk and the specific tension of men competing for invisible things. An observation deck ran along the upper level where instructors and senior personnel gathered when something interesting was happening. She had been assigned to a 3-on-1 contact evaluation. The official paperwork called it a close quarters response assessment. Everyone in the building understood what it actually was. An audition, or rather an invitation to fail publicly, so that the group could mark the boundary of where she belonged, which in their estimation was somewhere else. The 3 Marines assigned to the exercise had started circling before the whistle. One of them, a staff sergeant named Pruitt, was slapping the handle of his training baton against his palm in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He had fought in 2 deployments and had the particular ease of a man who had been in enough real situations to stop being afraid of pretend ones. He was not performing. He was simply confident in the way of someone who had earned the right to be. She stood in the center of the pit. No helmet, no baton. She hadn't even glanced at the equipment table. Up in the observation booth, an instructor leaned toward the man beside him. "She hasn't touched her gear." The other man shrugged. "Ex-contractor signals rotation, probably hoping if she doesn't pick up a weapon, they'll go easier on her." "She won't fight," the first one said. Down in the pit, Pruitt stepped forward, planting his boot deliberately in front of hers. Not touching, just claiming ground. He leaned forward slightly enough to make the statement without making the commitment. She looked at the boot, then at the ground between them, then at his throat. He took half a step back without realizing it. His teammates exchanged a look. The whistle blew. All 3 came at once. What happened next was the subject of significant conversation in the days that followed, because the footage was reviewed frame by frame and still didn't fully explain itself. Pruitt went low, driving for a takedown, hands reaching for her legs. He was fast and trained, and his technique was sound. He had executed this move 1,000 times, and it had worked 999 of them. But she had already moved a diagonal pivot that redirected his center of gravity without fighting it. Her arm looped under his elbow, and she dropped her shoulder, and suddenly his own momentum was completing a movement his body hadn't authorized. He hit the mat with a sound that echoed off the metal walls like a closing statement. She never looked at him, because the second Marine was already swinging. The baton cut through the space where her head had been a half-second earlier. She had stepped inside the arc before it finished, forearms locked under his grip, elbows drawn in tight against her body. She used him as a lever. One rotation of her shoulders, and the baton clattered to the ground. Her knee rose into his midsection, and when he folded forward, she positioned her elbow 2 centimeters beneath the pressure point that would have collapsed his airway entirely. She held it there, precise, still, patient. Then she released him and let him sink to one knee. Up in the booth, someone was already rewinding the footage. The third Marine came from her blind side. She didn't turn. She ducked, and when his arm swept over her shoulder, she locked it not with force, but with angle. The kind of control that exists in restraint programs that are not publicly discussed. The kind taught for operations where the person you are detaining cannot be harmed, but also cannot be permitted to move a single inch. She used that technique now, and the Marine's face met the mat before his legs had finished their forward motion. He didn't get up. The arena was silent. No bell, no whistle. Just Rena Holt walking to the edge of the pit and stopping there, breathing steady, not having spoken a single word, and not having picked up a single weapon. The footage review happened that evening in the back room of the mess facility. Phones held close and screens tilted away from anyone who wasn't part of the conversation. Senior Instructor Aldridge watched it 4 times. His expression didn't change, but his posture did incrementally with each replay until by the 4th viewing, he was sitting very still in the way that serious men sit when something has reclassified itself in their understanding. "That's not Academy," said the man beside him. "No," Aldridge said. "That's Black Site Protocol. Nobody teaches that anywhere with a sign on the door. I've been around 20 years and I've never seen that arm lock from that angle. That's not in any program I know about." Aldridge was already pulling her file again on the tablet in front of him. The screen cast pale light across his face in the dim room. He read the OGA parameters notation for the 3rd time that week. The 2 words that meant the conversation was already over before it started. He was about to close the file when he noticed something he hadn't paid close attention to on the first 2 reads. Tucked behind the assignment sheet, a secondary document, a citation. He read the header twice before it registered. Navy Cross. The name on the document was Rena Holt. The date was 3 years ago. The notation at the bottom, stamped in the particular bureaucratic font that the military used for its most final declarations, read, "Awarded posthumously." Aldridge set the tablet down on the table. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Commander Garrett Voss received the report that night. He was a man of 51 who had the bearing of someone who had spent his career in places where bearing was the only currency that held value. Former SEAL Team 6. 2 wars. Black operations under 4 administrations. Now assigned to overseeing inter-service cohesion programs, a title that meant something different than it sounded. He had personally written the assessment criteria for this facility. He knew what it was supposed to produce, and he knew from the moment Aldridge finished speaking that something inside it had gone sideways in a way that would need to be addressed. But not yet. First, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. He told the facility to let it run. He did not board a helicopter. Not yet. Rena did not respond to what happened in the pit. Not visibly. The next morning, she was in the yard at the same time as everyone else, running the same course, hitting the same splits. She sat in the same seat at the back of the tactical briefing room and answered questions when called on, with answers that were brief and precise and never more than the question required. This made people uncomfortable in a way they couldn't articulate. They were accustomed to reading people through their reactions. She gave them nothing to read. Harwick had a word for people like her. Soft. It was the word he used for anyone who didn't perform their toughness in the particular way the group had established as legitimate. He decided she needed a different kind of testing. It started with the boots. She came out for morning PT and her issued boots had been swapped for a pair, a full size smaller. She didn't say anything. She laced them and ran. By the 2nd mile, her feet were bleeding through the leather. She ran the full course without stopping, without altering her pace in any way that admitted the pain was real. Her pack for the field rotation weighed 37 pounds more than the required load. Someone had packed wet sand in bags and tucked them deep inside the main compartment. She carried it the entire rotation without filing a report. When she set it down at the end, she set it down the same way she set down everything, without ceremony, without commentary, without giving anyone the reaction they had been building toward. The administrative absence was more sophisticated. Her name appeared on a list of personnel who had failed to report for a mandatory session, a session she had been present for, seated and on time. A written reprimand was issued. She accepted it without contesting it. Aldridge watched all of this from a distance. He had been told to observe, and he observed, and some part of him needed to see how far her stillness actually went before something on the other side of it became visible. She didn't give him anything. On day 19, they gave her the sledgehammer. Rain was gathering at the edges of the sky, and the midday heat was pressing down like something physical when the instructor pointed to the tire stack at the far end of the yard and handed her a 30-pound steel sledgehammer with the handle worn smooth from years of use. 300 strikes, he said. Now. She didn't ask why. She didn't look at anyone in the group watching from the edge of the yard. She picked up the hammer, walked to the tire stack, planted her feet, and started swinging. No gloves. The hammer rose and fell in a rhythm that was mechanical at first, steady, and paced the kind of rhythm built to last. By strike 80, her palms were red from the friction of the worn handle against skin. By 140, they were blistered. The blisters opened before she reached 200, the skin tearing against the wood in a way that left dark smears on the handle that she wiped against her cargo pants between sets without pausing her count or altering her rhythm. From the observation window, someone radioed the lead instructor. Should we call it? The answer came back after a pause. She'll stop or she won't. She didn't stop. The men watching stopped talking among themselves somewhere around strike 250. The jokes had run out earlier than that. What remained was something they didn't have a comfortable name for, watching a person absorb something without breaking, without performing the breaking, without giving anyone the confirmation that the performance was landing. Strike 300 came down at the exact moment the storm clouds parted and a narrow column of afternoon light fell across the training yard. It caught the sweat on her face and the blood on her hands and turned all of it into something that looked like it had been applied with purpose. She set the hammer down on the ground beside the tire stack with the same deliberate economy she used for everything. She walked to the formation line. She stood and waited. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't say a single word. And that was the thing that reached through the group's defenses and touched something they hadn't expected to feel. Not the endurance, not the physical toughness, the fact that she wasn't doing it to prove a point. There was no performance in it, no theater, nothing that needed an audience or a reaction to give it meaning. She was simply absorbing it, filing it somewhere inside herself, the way a person files information they already knew they were going to need. It scared the hell out of the people watching, because if this was her staying quiet, none of them wanted to know what she looked like when she decided to speak. Commander Garrett Voss arrived on day 22. No announcement, no ceremony. A helicopter touched down on the secondary pad at the west end of the facility in the late afternoon, and Voss stepped out with 2 civilian observers at his back and the particular expression of a man who has already reviewed everything and is now simply arriving to confirm what he already knows. He called a full assembly. Everyone stood in the main yard. Trainees, contractors, instructors, support staff. Voss stood at the front with his hands behind his back and looked at them for a long moment before he began. He said he had reviewed the footage from the contact evaluation. He said he had reviewed the falsified absence report. He said he had reviewed the equipment sabotage and the pack weight and the footwear swap and the sledgehammer exercise that no official order had actually authorized. He said the word cowardice. He let it sit in the desert air. Then he turned to Rena Holt, who was standing in the third row with her hands at her sides, and her expression set to that particular kind of stillness she had made her default. Voss walked toward her. He extended his hand. She took it. One firm shake. No change in her expression. This woman, Voss said to the assembled group without looking away from her, has endured more psychological warfare in 20 days than most of you will encounter in 2 full deployments. She has not filed a complaint. She has not retaliated. She has not asked for anything. He let that land. She is staying. And I want every instructor in this facility to pull her file again. This time, both eyes open. He released her hand and stepped back. Rena returned to her position in formation. Something shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but in the way air shifts before weather changes, a subtle rearrangement of pressure around her, as if the space she occupied had been reclassified by something larger than any individual decision. The posthumous Navy Cross had moved through the facility now the way significant things move through closed groups. Quietly, from one set of eyes to the next, carrying the weight of the question none of them could bring themselves to ask out loud. She was listed as dead. She was standing right in front of them. Whatever she was, wherever she had been, whatever it had cost her, she had come back from somewhere most people didn't come back from, and she had come back looking like this, like someone who had made a long peace with difficult things and was simply waiting for whatever came next. Nobody laughed at her after that. Nobody looked away fast enough. But on the 23rd night, Cole Harwick thought he had figured out a way to finish what he'd started. He assembled 8 of them. Every man who had mocked her, sabotaged her, doubted her. Corporal Tanner Webb led the group into position near the motor pool, tall and rangy, with the look of someone who had always been good at everything physical and had never had to think much about what came after. They waited until the facility was dark, and the instructors were in quarters, and the compound belonged to nothing but moonlight and memory. They caught her just past the motor pool on her way back from the gear room. She was alone, carrying nothing. Harwick stepped into her path. Webb and the others fanned out behind him in a tight arc, cutting off every angle she might have used. Harwick spoke first. He said things about weak links and about what happened when people tried to belong somewhere they had no business being. She didn't respond. She stood there in the dark with her hands at her sides and breathed, slow and even, like someone counting down from a number only she could see. Then she spoke. 2 words. Last chance. Harwick blinked. The silence afterward felt different from the one before. Tighter, like something had been drawn across it. One of the men behind him moved first, reaching for her shoulder to throw her off balance and establish control before anyone else committed. Her left foot slid back 6 inches. Her right hand caught the incoming wrist at the exact angle that redirected momentum without fighting it. She used his own weight, leaned into the line of force, and his chest met the side of a transport vehicle with a sound like a door slamming in a quiet house. He didn't get up. The rest happened fast. Not because she was frantic, because she was not. She moved through them the way water moves through obstruction, not forcing, redirecting, using angle and weight, and the precise knowledge of where the human body breaks down under controlled pressure. An elbow into a rib at the correct angle. A leg sweep timed to the exact moment weight transferred forward. A palm strike so clean and fast that the men at the perimeter barely processed it before Harwick was already on his knees. She caught his collar. She leaned close enough that only he could hear. "You call this stress," she said quietly. She let him drop. 4 of them stood frozen. 3 had backed away. Not one moved toward her. She walked out of their broken circle without looking back. Her boots were steady on the gravel. Her breathing was even. She didn't hurry and she didn't slow down. Behind her, Tanner Webb sat against the bumper of the transport vehicle with his mouth slightly open, watching her go. He sat there for a long time. Then, to no one in particular, "What the hell is she?" One of the men further back voiced low, almost to himself, "I think she's the reason this whole program exists." The desert was quiet again, and Rena Holt walked back toward the admin building under a sky full of stars that didn't care about any of it, carrying whatever she carried, keeping whatever she kept moving through the dark the way she had apparently been moving for a very long time, like someone who knew exactly where she was going, even if no one else did yet. The morning after the motor pool incident, Lieutenant Callum Drake arrived at the debriefing room at 0600 to find Rena Holt already there. She was standing at attention in the center of the room, uniform perfect, arms at her sides. Behind her, 8 men sat or stood in various states of damage. Tanner Webb had one arm held carefully against his ribs. 2 others had bruising that hadn't finished developing. All of them were avoiding eye contact with everything in the room except the floor. Drake looked at Webb, then at the others, then at Rena. He asked what happened. Silence. "Did something occur last night, Specialist?" "Yes, sir." He waited. "Would you like to explain it?" "No, sir." A beat of silence that had weight to it. "You're not going to file a report." She looked at him directly. "That won't be necessary." Drake studied her for a moment. Then he dismissed the others. They filed out slowly, carefully, with the subdued movement of men who have been reminded of something they would rather not have learned. Webb was last. He paused at the door without turning around, then kept walking. When the room was empty, Drake sat down. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at the table, then at the window, then at Rena, who was still standing with the same posture she had walked in with, as if the conversation had not yet required her to do anything different. "Why?" Drake said. "Why not escalate it?" "Because they weren't the threat, sir." He looked up. "Then what were they?" "The test," she said, "and I passed." Drake was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to where she was standing and looked at her directly, and he raised his hand in a salute. Not the salute of a superior to a subordinate. The other kind, the kind that moves in the opposite direction and means something different entirely. She returned it without hesitation. 2 days later, Drake was in his office at 0430 when his secure line rang once and went silent. He picked up on the second attempt. "Drake, it's Voss. Walk the east perimeter with me. 20 minutes. The line went dead. They met at the east fence in the dark, 2 men moving along the chain link in the direction away from the facility lights. Voss walked with his hands behind his back. Drake matched his pace. The desert was cold at this hour, and the stars were out in the abundance they achieved only in places far from city light. Voss started talking without preamble, and he kept walking while he talked because what he had to say was not the kind of thing that benefited from sitting still. "What do you know about Mosul?" he said. Drake gave the standard operational history: urban warfare, ISIS remnants in the old city, high casualties, declared liberated but unstable for months after. Voss nodded. We lost a SEAL sniper team there. Building came down during an HVT extraction. 2 killed in action on site. One of those operators was listed as a lieutenant named Rena Holt, 27 years old, SEAL qualified, sniper school graduate. 3 combat deployments, Purple Heart, Navy Cross awarded posthumously. Drake felt the word land. Sir, he said carefully, Rena Holt is in this facility right now. I know, Voss said, because she didn't die in Mosul. He kept walking. The gravel shifted under their boots. Far out in the desert, something moved through the brush and went quiet again. She was buried alive for 46 minutes, Voss said. Local friendlies dug her out. Medevac to a black site medical facility in Baghdad. And while she was unconscious before she could agree to anything or refuse anything or make any decision about her own life, someone in the agency signed a document. Subject declared KIA. Extraction to OGA control approved. Mission priority override. Drake kept his eyes on the fence line. They recruited her while she was unconscious. They waited until she woke up, Voss said. Then they gave her a choice. But the paperwork had already been filed. The obituary had already been written. The flag had already been folded. She woke up dead on paper, and they told her what that meant and what they wanted her to do with it. Voss stopped walking. He looked out through the fence at the dark desert beyond it. Rena had found something in Mosul, he said. Contractors. American ones working under coalition cover selling U.S. military ordnance to insurgent cells. She had been building a case for weeks, gathering documentation, moving carefully, the way she did everything. Someone in the command structure found out. The IED that brought the building down was not ISIS. It was a directed action by people inside our own network who needed her evidence and her body to disappear in the same event. Drake stopped beside him. She survived, Voss said. So the agency made her an offer. Stay dead. Work from inside. Expose the corruption from a position no one would suspect because no one was looking for a ghost. In exchange, they would protect her team. Because if she pushed the case through official channels, every operator on that mission would have been dragged through congressional hearings. Careers destroyed, families torn apart, men she had trained beside and trusted and would have died for. They walked again. For 3 years, Voss said Rena Holt ran black operations in conditions that would break most Tier 1 operators. Syria. Yemen. Classified domestic operations. No support structure. No team. No one watching her back except handlers she met once every 6 months in locations she wasn't told in advance. 43 operations. 62 high-value captures. 3 smuggling networks dismantled. 17 contractors in federal prison. All of it done alone. All of it done while officially dead. Drake let those numbers settle. Why come back, he said. Why risk exposure now? Because being a ghost was killing her, Voss said. Not the missions, not the danger, the isolation. She is a SEAL, Drake. We are not built for solitary. We are built for teams, for the kind of trust that only exists between people who have chosen the same difficult thing together. She had been cut off from all of that for 3 years, and she needed to know if she could still function alongside people. If the isolation had done damage she couldn't repair. So she asked to come here. She asked the agency to let her test herself, Voss said. And everyone in this facility who has been testing her, pushing her, trying to break her, they were not the examiners. They were the exam. She was the one doing the evaluating. They reached the northeast corner of the fence and turned without stopping. There is a second matter, Voss said. His voice shifted in a way Drake caught. A tightening. The way a man's voice changes when what he is about to say carries more weight than everything that came before it. Dmitry Kasov, Voss said. Former Spetsnaz. Built one of the most sophisticated illegal arms networks operating in the Middle East and North Africa corridor. He was arrested 18 months ago as a direct result of intelligence Rena gathered and transmitted over 14 months of solo deep cover operations. Drake waited. 3 days ago, Kasov made bail. His legal team produced evidence of procedural violations in the original intercept authorization. The cooperation agreement collapsed. He is a free man pending trial. And 48 hours ago, someone leaked Rena's location to his network. Someone inside this facility. We are still identifying the specific source. But Kasov has had 48 hours to plan and move assets into position. Drake stopped walking. How many assets? 12 to 15. Former contractors. Men from his network who lost everything when Rena's intelligence brought the operation down. Experienced. Motivated. NSA intercepts place a forward element within 3 hours of this facility as of 90 minutes ago. Voss looked at him steadily in the dark. Go find her. Tell her everything. And Drake. Don't offer her the exit. Don't suggest that the professional thing is to let the agency extract her. She needs someone who understands what she is. That's why I'm telling you. He turned and walked back toward the facility. Drake found her in the briefing room at 0650. She was already standing when he walked in, arms folded, weight-balanced, head slightly tilted in the way she carried herself when she was processing something she hadn't been told yet. They're coming, aren't they? She said. Drake stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. Voss's vehicle is still behind the admin building under a tarp that doesn't quite reach the rear panel. 2 civilian surveillance specialists have been running perimeter checks every 4 hours. That's not standard protocol for this facility. And you have been watching me for the last 48 hours like a man waiting for something to arrive. She paused. Either I'm about to be arrested or someone is about to hit this facility. And I haven't done anything arrestable. Drake closed the door behind him. He told her everything. Mosul, the agency, the 3 years, Kasov. He gave it to her straight without cushioning because she would know the difference between information and performance and had no use for the latter. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. How many, she said. 12 to 15, all experienced. She nodded once. They'll come at night. Multiple breach points. Communications first, then isolate and eliminate. Standard contractor playbook. She looked at Drake. What is the facility's defensive posture? He told her. Training installation. Limited armed instructors. Perimeter sensors. A fence designed to keep civilians out rather than professionals in. So we're soft, she said. Essentially, she was already thinking. He could see it in the quality of her stillness, the way it shifted from rest to calculation without passing through anything in between. Then we harden up, she said. I need you to pull every instructor in this facility with real combat experience. Branch doesn't matter. If they have been in a firefight and they didn't break, I need them in a room in 2 hours. Drake nodded. And Webb, she said. He looked at her. Tanner Webb and his crew. I want them in the defensive plan. You're sure about that? They're trained, she said. And they made a mistake, and they know it. Men who know they made a mistake will fight harder than men who think they're untouchable. When the shooting starts, they'll stand. She headed for the door. One more thing, Drake said. She stopped. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a plain envelope. He set it on the table between them. Voss asked me to give you this before the briefing. She picked it up, opened it. Inside were 3 photographs, all taken at the same location. A forward operating base staging area in a desert environment, vehicles and equipment visible in the background. The same group of men in each photo seals by their bearing and equipment, standing in the particular way of people who have chosen to be photographed reluctantly and are making the best of it. In every photo there was a space in the group, a gap on the left side of the formation where someone should have been standing. She turned the first photograph over. On the back in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper the way emotional people write when they are trying not to show it. Viper, wherever you are, we're still your team. Ward Calloway, year 1. She turned the second. Same handwriting, slightly looser. Year 2, we don't close ranks, your place is still here. The third photograph. Year 3. The handwriting was different. Still Calloway's, but slower, more deliberate. Like someone writing something they needed to get exactly right. Viper. I don't know if you're alive or if you're gone or if somewhere in between is even a thing that exists. But I keep showing up. That's all I know how to do. Come home when you can. We'll be here. Rena stood at the table with the 3 photographs spread in front of her and looked at them for a long time. She looked at the gap in every formation, the space that had been left deliberately every year for 3 years by a man who didn't know whether she was alive but kept leaving room for her anyway. She did not speak. She did not move. But something shifted in her face, something very small and very deep, like a door opening briefly in a room that had been sealed for years, admitting a sliver of light before closing again. It was the only time in 23 days that anyone had seen anything in her face that looked like it might cost her something to contain. She gathered the photographs carefully, put them back in the envelope, folded it once and placed it in the chest pocket of her shirt, pressing it flat with the palm of her hand before letting go. She looked at Drake. 2 hours, she said. Get everyone together. That night, 6 hours before the attack was scheduled to arrive, Rena went out alone. She told no one. She pulled a dark jacket over her gear, checked her sidearm, and slipped out the east door of the admin building into the cold desert night. The facility was quiet, most personnel in their bunks, the perimeter sensors running the miscalibrated pattern she had deliberately set to read as maintenance error to anyone studying it from outside. She moved along the fence line in the direction of the east access road, staying in the shadow of the buildings, using the ambient light from the facility without letting it silhouette her against the dark. She had done this in 100 places. Her body moved without being asked. She was looking for something specific. She found it 20 minutes out from the main gate. Tire tracks in the dirt access road. Fresh. 2 vehicles heavy stopping and reversing. The kind of turnaround that said staging not through traffic. She crouched and read the tread pattern in the beam of a pen light held low to the ground, then killed the light and stood in the dark with her hand on the grip of her sidearm. 30 meters further at the bend where the access road curved east toward the open desert, she saw the ember. A cigarette barely visible, the orange tip moving in a slow arc down and then stationary at knee height. Someone crouching, smoking, watching the facility lights from the edge of the dark. A scout. Kasov had sent a forward element ahead to study the perimeter before the main push. Her adjusted sensor array had told him exactly where the gaps were. Or had tried to. She gave the scout 30 seconds to finish his cigarette. Then she moved. She came in from behind and downwind, moving through the dry scrub without sound, the way she had been trained to move in environments where sound was the difference between the mission continuing and the mission ending. The scout was still watching the facility through compact binoculars when she stepped up behind him and pressed the barrel of her sidearm against the back of his neck. He froze. She took the binoculars. She took his radio. She zip-tied his wrist to a section of fence post that had corroded loose from its footing and left him there with tape over his mouth, sitting in the dark with the knowledge that something had come out of the facility he had been watching and found him without him ever hearing it approach. She walked back along the fence line, studying the radio as she went. Military grade. Encrypted channel. She couldn't crack the encryption in the field, but she could read the frequency band, and she had spent 3 years tracking Kasov's network's operational signatures across 3 countries. She knew what this band meant for approach timing. They were coming before dawn, not after. She handed the radio to the civilian surveillance specialist at the east checkpoint and gave him a short sequence of technical instructions that turned his expression from bored to focused in under 5 seconds. "Record everything that comes across this frequency," she said. "Route it to my channel. I don't need you to understand it. I need it captured." He nodded. She went back to the motor pool to wait. At 0100, she gathered the planning team for a final walkthrough. Voss sat off to the side with his arms folded, watching. Drake stood near the door. Aldridge was there, and a combat engineer named Stevens, who had done 2 Marine Corps deployments and carried the quiet of someone who had stopped performing readiness and simply carried it. Webb and 2 of his crew sat against the far wall, not quite at ease, but present in the way that mattered. Rena stood at the hand-drawn facility map taped to the wall and moved as she talked, tracing routes with her finger pointing to positions, never still for more than the few seconds it took to land a specific point. "Kasov's team will approach from the east," she said. "I confirmed it 2 hours ago. I removed their forward scout from his position. They're staged at the access road 3 kilometers out. They'll move in on foot, breach the perimeter at 3 points simultaneously, northeast, south, and the western gap that Drake flagged." She marked all 3 with a pin. "His scout got enough of a look before I took him off the board. Assume they know about the western coverage hole." She moved down the map. Primary defensive line in the admin building. Elevated positions. Clear sight lines to all 3 breach points. We run the sensor array as is, let it look like soft defense. The real engagement zone is here. She tapped the motor pool. "Small team. Webb, you and 2 others. When Kasov's operators breach and move toward admin, you flank from behind. Crossfire. They're caught between 2 lines with no clean exit." She paused. "I'll be in the motor pool when they arrive. I'm the target they'll clear to before advancing. We use that." Webb looked at her steadily. "That's the most exposed position." "Yes," she said. He held her gaze, then he nodded. She walked through weapons inventory, body armor allocation, radio timing, civilian shelter protocols. She talked about fields of fire and the precise sequencing of when each station would engage and when they would hold. She talked about Kasov specifically, his pattern, his doctrine, the particular way angry men with military training committed to an assault when they believed they had identified the target. "He wants to look at me when this ends," she said. "We use that. We give him a direct line to me and let him believe he's taking it on his terms. Then we close the exits." At one point, Drake looked up from the map. "Western Gap is still open," he said. "Even with the scout removed, anyone on their team who received his transmission before I took his radio has that information." Rena looked at him. "I know," she said. "Stevens, I want you on the western interior. If anyone comes through that gap ahead of the main push, you stop them before they reach the admin building." Stevens nodded. "Understood." She kept moving. After the briefing, the room emptied quickly. Webb stopped at the door and turned back. He looked at her without speaking for a moment. "You could have ended us," he said finally. "After the motor pool. You had grounds. You could have filed, and all of us would have been gone before the end of the week." She looked at him. "Breaking people was never the point," she said. "And when tonight is over, I'm going to need people who know exactly how bad they can be and have decided to be something else. That's more useful to me than anything a reprimand could produce. You're one of them, whether you've figured that out yet or not." Webb held that for a moment. Then he turned and walked out. Drake stayed. "In the motor pool," he said. "When it starts, I'm going to be at the entrance. I won't come inside after you, but I'll be there." She looked at him. "When Kasov shows up," she said, "it is not going to look clean. There is going to be a moment when you think we should pull back. Wait for backup. Call for reinforcement." He waited. "We won't have time for any of that. I need to know right now whether you trust me. Not the plan. Me." Drake didn't hesitate. "I trust you," he said. She picked up the map from the table and folded it once. "When he shows up," she said quietly, almost to herself, "he's going to realize he made a mistake." "What mistake?" Drake said, "thinking I was someone he could kill twice." She walked out of the room and across the dark compound to the motor pool maintenance bay, where she had set up her position hours earlier. She sat down with her back against the concrete support pillar, and her M4 carbine across her lap, and the 3 photographs from Ward Calloway tucked inside her chest pocket, pressed flat against her sternum. The facility was quiet. It would not stay that way. The attack came at 2:47 in the morning. 3 explosions in 4 seconds. Northeast fence, south fence. Then the western gap, the 40 meters of uncovered ground Drake had flagged, and the scout had confirmed before Rena removed him from position. The shaped charges blew in sequence, and the sound rolled across the compound and came back off the metal buildings at a slightly different pitch, like an echo that had picked up something extra on the way. Drake's voice on the radio clipped. "Western gap is breached. 2 contacts moving through." Rena keyed her radio. "All stations, weapons hold. Wait for my signal." She was already prone behind the concrete pillar with her M4 up. Through the motor pool bay door, she could see the compound beyond the sensor lights doing their job, the admin building looking exactly like a defended position, while the real defense waited in the dark behind its own eyes. Martinez, positioned on the admin building roof with night optics, came over the radio. 12 confirmed contacts, moving in from the east access road in staggered column. "These are professionals. They know what they're doing." Rena said, "Hold." Webb from the east corner. "Ready." Stevens from behind the vehicle chassis along the west interior wall. 2 contacts through the gap. "Moving toward admin. I have them." "Handle them quietly," Rena said. "Don't announce it." A pause. Then Stevens' quieter copy. She waited. 2 minutes of silence that had texture to it. The kind of silence made of people holding still. Then Stevens again, "West side clear. 2 down, no noise." "Copy," Rena said. "Hold your position." She counted. At the motor pool entrance, movement appeared in the gap of the bay door. 4 figures, low and fast, moving with the kind of spacing that came from training, repeated until it became instinct. They cleared the threshold and split into pairs, moving along opposite walls, sweeping angles with practiced economy. She let them get all the way in. She let them commit to the sweep. Let them believe the space was empty and theirs. Then she said loud enough to carry across the bay, "Last chance." The 4 figures stopped. One of them turned his head toward the sound. The voice that came back was accented Russian, smoothed by years working in international environments. He said Kasov's name and hers in the same sentence. "Then you were told right," Rena replied. "Last chance is over." She took the first shot from behind the pillar. Throat gap between helmet and body armor. The operator went down, hard weapon clattering off the concrete. The others scattered, instantly returning fire toward the muzzle flash position. She was already rolling left. She came up behind the steel workbench and fired twice more. 1 round sparked off ceramic plate. The other found soft tissue below the raised arm of a man already twisting to engage. Drake opened up from the north entrance and controlled 3-round bursts. Webb and his crew engaged from the east corner, suppressing the breach point before anyone could retreat through it. The motor pool became noise and flash and the specific violence of an enclosed space where every surface returns sound at a different angle, and muzzle flash bleaches your vision white between seconds. She moved through it the way she had moved through 43 operations in 3 years. not by reacting but by being where the next moment required her to be before it arrived. 90 seconds after the first shot, it was over inside the bay. 3 down. 1 had retreated under smoke cover toward the perimeter. Motor pool secure, she reported. 3 down, 1 withdrawn. No friendly casualties. Status on other sectors. Admin building holding Voss replied, perimeter pressure on all sides but no full breach attempt here yet. They're reassessing. They know we're not soft, Rena said. 60 seconds. Kasov redirects. She was right. 58 seconds later, Martinez called contact on the eastern fence. 8 figures, no longer staggered column but consolidated tight formation moving fast toward a single breach point. Changing tactics. Abandoning multi-axis approach in favor of concentrated force. And then something came through the jury-rigged broadband receiver that the surveillance specialist had configured on Rena's instruction, pulling from the scout's radio frequency. A short transmission. 3 seconds. Russian. The specialist's voice on the radio careful and precise. They want her alive if possible. He needs her to say her name on record. Drake's voice low, say her name. Rena understood it fully the moment the words landed. Kasov didn't just want her dead. Dead was simple. A solved problem with no complications. What he wanted was to destroy the legal architecture that had protected her work for 3 years. The OGA covered the classified status, the chain of authorization that had made her operations possible, and kept 17 contractors in federal prison. If she confirmed her identity on record in front of witnesses outside the sanctioned authorization chain, everything she had built could be dismantled. Evidence chains could be challenged. 17 federal convictions could develop cracks that became reversals. He didn't want to kill Rena Holt. He wanted to erase what she had done with her life. Not going to happen, she said to no one. She keyed her radio. Voss. Every exterior light. All of them. Simultaneously. 30 seconds. That exposes our positions. Kasov thinks he owns the dark, she said. We take it away. He's been running a controlled operation and now he has to react. Angry men react badly. A pause. 30 seconds. Mark. Rena looked at Drake across the bay. He was already moving toward her. When the lights come on, she said, East side, together. He nodded. She counted in her head. The facility sat in absolute darkness. Beyond the fence, she could feel Kasov's team consolidating, doing the arithmetic on numbers and cover and darkness, calculating that they still had the advantage. She hit 0. The compound went from absolute dark to harsh white light in the space of a single second. Every flood lamp, every exterior fixture, every pathway light firing simultaneously, turning the California desert facility into something that looked like midday under a colorless sun. And they're caught completely in the open along the eastern fence line were 8 figures in tactical gear with nowhere to go and no darkness left to use. For 1 full second, nothing moved. Then everything moved at once. Kasov's team scattered toward cover. Return fire sparked from 3 positions, immediately rounds snapping past the motor pool entrance and punching metal and concrete with sounds like hammers on hollow steel. From the admin building roof, Martinez and 2 instructors opened up without hesitation, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered the open ground between the fence and the motor pool buildings and left no clean path forward. Rena and Drake went through the east side at a run. She moved the way she always moved under fire. Not panicked and not cautious, but calibrated, covering ground in bounds, using every piece of terrain between her and the next position, measuring threat and distance and angle simultaneously without the conscious processing that trained fear out of the body's calculation. Drake matched her pace and covered the angles she wasn't covering the way a partner does when they have stopped thinking about working together and are simply doing it. From the south, Webb's voice on the radio, tight but steady. 2 contacts flanking south. Engaging. A beat of quiet. South side clear, Webb said. 2 down, we're good. Rena and Drake hit the generator building in 20 seconds. 3 of Kasov's operators had taken cover there, pinned by admin building fire, but still fighting, rifles up and disciplined. She came around the corner, already firing. 2 went down immediately. The 3rd turned weapon coming up. Drake shot him before he completed the movement. Generator building secure, Rena reported. 3 down. Status on remaining, Martinez called. 2 unaccounted for, last known position moving north toward the motor pool. And then Voss's voice, quieter than anything else on the radio that night. Viper. Intercept confirms Kasov himself is in the facility. He came in with the 2nd wave. He's moving toward the motor pool. She stopped. He's in the motor pool, she said. Copy, Voss said. Federal backup is 11 minutes out. We hold position and wait. Negative. Viper. If we wait, he breaks contact when he hears the federal vehicles, she said. He goes back into the network and we do this again in 6 months somewhere else. Or we finish it now. Voss was quiet for 3 seconds. Drake looked at her. He was already checking his magazine. He's your call, Voss said. But you don't go in alone. She looked at Drake. He was already moving. Together, he said. They moved back toward the motor pool. At the entrance, she stopped. Cover the south exit, she said. Anyone tries to leave that way, you stop them. But don't come inside after me. Not unless you hear nothing for 60 seconds. Then come in. He met her gaze. 60 seconds, he said. She went through the main bay entrance alone. Inside the motor pool was dark again. The floodlights outside threw hard bars of white through the door gaps and high windows, laying stripes of light across the concrete floor with deep shadow between them. She moved through the shadow spaces, rifle up, breathing measured and deliberate. She could feel him in there, not hear him, not see him. Just the awareness that comes from enough time in enough dangerous places, the sense of another trained body in the same enclosed space, making the same calculations from the same doctrine, waiting for the same kind of opening. A voice came from the far end of the bay. Viper. She stopped, said nothing. 3 years, Kasov said. I looked for you. I believed what they told me, that the building had taken care of everything, that you were in the ground somewhere outside Mosul. She moved left. Slow. Using the sound of his voice to place him without giving away her own position. Then I heard you were still breathing, he said. Working in the dark like me, building a case against people who were simply doing what markets require. The IED was yours, she said. Her voice gave away nothing about where she was standing. A pause. Yes. You killed 2 of my people to protect a business arrangement. I protected an investment, he said. You were a liability that had been allowed to operate too close to things that were not your concern. She heard movement. He was circling right. She adjusted left and moved forward 2 steps, closing the distance at an angle he wouldn't expect. You cost me 18 months, he said. My network. My freedom. Men who trusted me lost everything because you decided your conscience outweighed the work we were all doing. The work was selling American weapons to people who used them to kill American soldiers, she said. War creates markets, he said. I didn't create the war. She saw his silhouette then, just briefly. A shift of shadow against lighter dark near the vehicle bay at the far end of the motor pool. Big, armored, moving with the specific patience of someone who had done this too many times to be hurried by it. She didn't take the shot. Last chance, Dmitri. He laughed, low and without any humor in it. You keep saying that. In Mosul before the building came down. Did you give a warning then too? I gave your people a chance to hand over the evidence, she said. They tried to bury me instead. And here we are. Here we are. He came out of cover fast. Professional assault, exactly the way she had known he would, because she had read the doctrine and spent 3 years inside the operational logic of networks that trained the same way. He fired as he moved, driving toward her position, closing distance for a contact range elimination. She didn't retreat. She moved toward him, the same move she had used in the pit on the first day of all of this, the same instinct that had carried her through 43 operations in 3 years, the understanding that moving into an attack collapsed the attacker's geometry and gave the defender the fraction of a second that decided everything. She had learned it once as technique. She had spent 3 years learning it as instinct. His rounds went over her left shoulder. She fired once, twice, center mass. He hit the ground hard. His weapon skidded across the concrete and came to rest in a bar of pale light from the high window. He reached for it. His arm didn't respond. He looked at his hand as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Rena stood over him. He looked up at her. His breathing had changed. The body armor had caught both rounds, but the hydrostatic shock was doing its work and his body was beginning to understand what his mind hadn't yet accepted. The ghost wins, he said, voice rough. She shook her head. No, she said. The seal wins. There's a difference. His eyes closed. He stopped reaching for the weapon. She stood there with her rifle still raised, making certain. Then she heard movement at the south door and spun finger on the trigger. The last operator. Young, terrified. His weapon was up but shaking in the specific way of someone who has just watched something recalibrate everything he thought he understood about the situation he was in. Don't, Rena said. He fired, wild, panicked. The round went wide by 4 feet and sparked off a metal shelf. Her round didn't miss. She lowered her rifle. Motor pool secure, she said into the radio. Kasov is down. All hostiles neutralized. I'm coming out. She walked through the main bay entrance to find Drake standing at the threshold with his rifle at his side and his face carrying the expression of someone who had been counting seconds. He looked at her. You good, he said. She thought about it for a moment, about what that word meant tonight. Yeah, she said, I'm good. Federal vehicles arrived 9 minutes later. 3 dark SUVs and a support unit. Agents moved through the compound with the efficient focus of people arriving at the end of something rather than the beginning, securing the scene, documenting casualties, beginning the process of converting a combat situation into a paper record. The lead agent was a woman named Richardson, who produced credentials without being asked and found Rena near the admin building. "Lieutenant Holt," she said, "your handler wants to debrief you immediately. Cover status is compromised. Standard protocol is immediate extraction and relocation." Rena looked at the compound around her. Webb directing the cleanup near the motor pool. Stevens being helped toward the medical station by 2 of Webb's crew. Drake standing near the motor pool entrance watching her with the particular expression of someone who wants to make sure something is real before they stop watching. "Tell my handler I'll debrief when I'm ready," Rena said. Richardson raised an eyebrow. "You're refusing extraction." "I'm delaying it," Rena said. "There's a difference." She walked away before Richardson could respond and climbed to the second floor of the admin building where Voss was standing at the window with his hands behind his back. He turned when she came in. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "There's one more thing," Voss said. "Richardson's team identified the leak source while you were in the motor pool." She waited. "Senior NCO assigned to this facility," he said. "He had been in contact with Kasov's network for several months before you arrived. When you appeared and he accessed your file, he understood what you were. He made a call. His name is on the falsified absence record. He signed it." Rena looked out the window at the compound below, at the place where she had carried the sledgehammer and walked in boots that didn't fit and absorbed everything they could put in front of her without breaking. "Then I want to give my full debrief to the Inspector General's office directly," she said. "Not my handler. Directly. Mosul. The IED, the contractor network, the leak, all of it. No more ghosts." Voss nodded. "I'll arrange it." He reached into the folder on his desk and placed a single sheet of paper on the windowsill between them. "Reinstatement to active duty," he said. "Effective the date of your declared death in Mosul, retroactive. Lieutenant Commander, the Navy isn't giving you something. They're acknowledging what the record already shows." She picked up the paper. "Read it once." "There's a position attached," Voss said. "Integrated Special Operations Training Program. West Coast Facility. You build it from the ground up. Curriculum staff methodology. Take what operators like you have learned in places that don't appear in any manual and find a way to pass it on before those lessons disappear." She set the paper down. "I want Drake," she said, "and I want Webb." Voss looked at her. "Webb made a mistake," she said. "Then he learned from it. Then when the shooting started, he ran toward the problem instead of away from it. That's someone I can build something with." Voss nodded slowly. "Anyone else?" "Give me a week," she said. "I'll have a full roster." They shook hands, the handshake of one soldier to another with nothing left to prove between them. She left the office and walked back down through the building and out into the compound. The sky was beginning to turn in the east, the darkness thinning at the edges the way it thinned in the desert all at once rather than gradually, as if the dark had simply decided to stop. Webb was directing cleanup near the motor pool. He saw her coming and met her halfway. She told him about the position. He stood very still while she spoke. After everything he said, "I'm offering you a chance," she said, "to be better than what you were, to teach other people what you learned the hard way, to earn back what you spent badly." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "absolutely yes." "Good. Report with Drake in 2 weeks. And Webb, one thing you need to understand about how this program runs." He waited. "We don't build people by breaking them," she said. "We show them what they're capable of. Discipline, trust, proving you deserve to stand next to the people who came before you. That's the whole method. That's all of it." Something shifted in his bearing. Not the physicality of it, but the quality, as if the posture he had been carrying for years had been built on a premise that had just been quietly revised. She walked to the eastern perimeter fence and stood alone for a moment. The compound was coming back to life around her. Light growing. People moving with the careful deliberateness of the morning after difficult things. She took out her phone. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she dialed. Ward Calloway answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant some part of him had been waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. She didn't say hello. "Calloway," she said, "it's Viper." The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then his voice came through, rough and careful. The voice of someone who had been told something a long time ago and had never entirely believed it. "I knew it," he said. "I knew you weren't gone. I kept telling them. I kept saying something didn't add up. Every year I kept saying it." She looked out at this lightening sky, at the desert going from black to gray to the pale gold of early morning, the way it only happened in places far enough from everything that the dawn arrived without interference. "I'm home, Ward," she said. "Tell the others." She heard him take a breath that was not quite steady. "I'll tell them," he said. "They're going to lose their minds. Every one of them." She almost smiled. She could feel it at the corner of her mouth, the particular warmth of something returning that had been absent long enough to be mourned properly. "I have some things to finish here first," she said. "But soon, I promise." He said her name then, not her call sign, her actual name. The one that had been on the posthumous citation and the folded flag and the memorial record that she had not been present for. The name that had been spoken at a service she had not attended for a life that had not actually ended. It sounded different than she remembered. She said goodbye and ended the call and stood at the fence with the phone in her hand and the envelope of photographs pressed against her chest. The desert morning arrived around her without ceremony, the way mornings arrived in places that didn't care about the human weight of what had happened in the dark before them. She stood there for another minute. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked back toward the facility and the work that was waiting. 3 weeks later, she stood in front of 24 recruits on a training ground at the West Coast Special Operations Training Facility. Drake was to her right, Webb to her left. Behind them, the facility was everything she had designed it to be. Spare and functional and built for the work rather than the appearance of it. No unnecessary architecture, no performance, just the equipment and the space and the people. The recruits were young. Some had that particular brightness of people who think knowing what they want is the same as knowing what it costs. She had been that person once. She understood exactly what it meant and what it was going to take to transform it into something that could survive the places these people were going to go and still come back as itself. She looked at them for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "My name is Lieutenant Commander Rena Holt. Before we begin, I'm going to tell you something true. Every instructor in this program expects you to fail. Not might fail, will fail. Because that is what this program is designed to produce. First the failure so we can see what is underneath it. So we can find out what you are actually made of when the thing you have been relying on stops working." She walked the line slowly. "Some of you will quit," she said. "Some of you will get hurt. Some of you will discover that what you wanted was the idea of this and not the reality of it, and that is information, not shame. We cannot use people who are in love with the idea. We need people who can endure 3 years alone in the dark and still remember why they started and who they started it for." She stopped at the center of the line. "In this program, we do not build you by breaking you. We show you what you are capable of when the noise stops and the performance stops, and the only thing left is the decision about who you are going to be when it actually matters. Discipline, trust, bringing everyone home. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing that has ever mattered." She looked down the line one more time. 24 recruits, not one of them moved. "Last chance," she said. Nobody moved. She nodded once. "Let's begin."